The scorching Arizona sun beat down on Copper Creek in the summer of 1878, but it wasn't the heat that made Clara Zimmerman feel as if she were burning alive, it was the stares. She kept her gaze fixed on the dusty ground as she made her way down the town's main street, the whispers following her like shadows. "There she goes again," came the hushed voice of Mrs. Holbrook outside the general store. Poor broken thing. Clara clutched her market basket tighter, quickening her steps. 2 years had passed since the incident, yet the town's memory remained unforgiving. She'd learned to live with the whispers, the pitying glances, and the not-so-subtle gossip that trailed her like the dust kicked up by wagon wheels. "Miss Zimmerman," called Mr. Peterson from his barber shop. "Fine day, isn't it?" She offered a polite nod, but didn't stop. Mr. Peterson was among the few who still treated her with something resembling normalcy, but even his kindness felt like charity. Clara had once been the vibrant daughter of Copper Creek's most successful rancher, her future bright as polished silver. Now, at 23, she was the town's cautionary tale. The bell above the general store jingled as Clara stepped inside, grateful for the momentary reprieve from the sun and stares. Mrs. Geller, the shopkeeper's wife, glanced up from arranging a display of preserved peaches. "Clara, dear," she said, her voice honeyed with false warmth. "What can we get for you today?" "Just some flour and coffee, please." Clara kept her voice even, her eyes focused on her list. "And thread, if you have any blue." As Mrs. Geller gathered the items, Clara noticed a cluster of women by the fabric section, their conversation dying as they spotted her. One leaned toward another, whispering behind her hand while staring directly at Clara. The word "broken" floated across the store like a tumbleweed. Clara paid for her purchases and hurried out, nearly colliding with a tall figure on the boardwalk. Strong hands steadied her shoulders, preventing her from tumbling backward. "Whoa there," came a deep voice, warm as whiskey. "No rush. The day's still young." Clara looked up into eyes the color of worn leather, set in a sun-bronzed face partially shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat. She didn't recognize him, which meant he was either passing through or newly arrived. Either way, he didn't yet know her story. "Excuse me," she murmured, stepping aside. The stranger touched the brim of his hat. "Madam." He had the confident posture of a man comfortable in his own skin. His clothes were trail-worn but clean denim trousers, a faded red cotton shirt, and a weathered leather vest. A gun belt hugged his hips, the holster worn in a way that suggested the weapon wasn't merely decorative. Clara hurried past him, feeling his gaze follow her down the street. It didn't matter. He'd hear the whispers soon enough, and then he'd look at her the same way everyone else did. By the time she reached her father's ranch a mile outside of town, Clara's shoulders ached with tension. The Lazy Z spread across 500 acres of Arizona territory, a modest operation compared to some, but prosperous enough. Her father had built it from nothing after coming west with Clara's mother 25 years ago. "That you, Clara?" her father called from the barn as she crossed the yard. James Zimmerman emerged, wiping his hands on a rag. At 53, he remained strong despite the gray threading through his once dark hair. The lines around his eyes had deepened since her mother's passing 4 years ago, and even more after what happened to Clara. "Got everything you needed in town?" he asked, taking the heavy basket from her. "Yes, Pa." She forced a smile. "How's the new foal?" "Thriving. That mare's doing a fine job." He glanced at her face, his expression softening. "Rough day." Clara shook her head. "Same as always." Her father's jaw tightened. "This town has a short memory when it comes to kindness and a long one for tragedy. Don't let them define you, Clara." She nodded, having heard the advice countless times. It was easier said than done when your whole life was confined to a place where everyone knew your darkest moment. "Someone new in town," she said, changing the subject. "Tall fellow, looked like he's ridden some hard trails." "That'd be the man Miller hired to break horses," her father replied. "Name's Tucker Vance. Supposed to be good with even the meanest mustangs." Clara nodded absently. It didn't matter who he was. Like everyone else who passed through Copper Creek, he'd eventually hear about Clara Zimmerman and how she'd been left at the altar by Samuel Wilcox 2 years ago, left standing in her wedding dress before the entire town after he'd run off with the banker's daughter. How she'd collapsed in front of everyone, screaming and sobbing until Doc Harrison had to sedate her. how she'd barely spoken for months after, like something inside her had shattered beyond repair. Broken, they called her. Damaged goods. A cautionary tale for young girls about putting too much faith in a man's promises. Clara had heard it all. She'd survived it all. But surviving wasn't living, and sometimes she wondered if she'd ever truly live again. The next morning, Clara was feeding the chickens when she heard hoofbeats approaching. She straightened, shielding her eyes against the morning sun as a rider came into view. It was the stranger from town, Tucker Vance. He reined his horse to a stop at the fence. "Morning, miss. Your father around. He's mending fences in the north pasture," Clara replied, brushing feed from her apron. "Something I can help you with, Mr. Vance?" Surprise flickered across his face. "You know my name. Small town," she said simply. "Word travels fast." He dismounted with fluid grace, tying his horse to the fence post. "And you'd be Miss Zimmerman, I take it?" "Clara," she confirmed, wondering if his easy manner would change once he heard the town gossip. "Tucker Vance." He removed his hat, revealing dark hair in need of a trim. "Bob Miller sent me. Said your father might have a stallion that needs breaking." "The black Mustang?" Clara raised an eyebrow. "Pa caught him last spring. He's been trying to break him ever since." "That would be the one." Tucker smiled, revealing a small gap between his front teeth that somehow added to rather than detracted from his rugged appeal. "Miller says your father's offering good money to anyone who can gentle him enough to ride." Clara led him toward the corral where the black Mustang was kept. The horse paced the perimeter, muscles rippling beneath his glossy coat, watching them with wary eyes. "He's beautiful," Tucker murmured, leaning against the fence. "And proud. And dangerous," Clara added. "He's thrown 3 men already. One broke his arm, another his collarbone." Tucker studied the animal with respect rather than the arrogance most horse breakers displayed. "He's not mean, just scared. Someone hurt him before." Clara glanced at Tucker, surprised by his insight. "How can you tell?" "See how he flinches when you raise your hand." Tucker demonstrated, lifting his arm slowly. Sure enough, the Mustang tossed his head nervously. "That's not wild behavior. That's learned fear." He turned to face Clara fully, his expression serious. "Sometimes the most dangerous creatures are just the most frightened ones." There was something in his eyes that made Clara wonder if he was still talking about the horse. Before she could respond, her father rode up on his bay gelding. "Mr. Vance," James Zimmerman called, dismounting. "I see you've met my daughter." "Yes, sir. She was just showing me your Mustang." The men shook hands, discussing terms while Clara excused herself to finish her chores. But throughout the day, she found herself drawn back to the corral where Tucker had begun his work with the stallion. Unlike other breakers she'd seen, Tucker didn't immediately try to saddle or ride the horse. Instead, he simply entered the corral and stood motionless in the center, ignoring the nervous animal circling him. After some time, he began speaking in a low, steady voice that carried on the breeze. "Nobody's going to hurt you anymore," he was saying. "You've got a right to be cautious, but you don't need to be afraid." Clara watched from the edge of the barn, fascinated by his patience. When the stallion eventually approached to sniff Tucker's outstretched hand, she felt a strange echo of hope in her chest. Over the next few days, Tucker became a regular presence at the ranch, arriving early and staying until dusk as he worked with the Mustang. Clara found herself creating excuses to be near the corral, watching his gentle but firm approach to the once wild animal. On the 4th day, as Clara brought Tucker a canteen of water, she overheard 2 ranch hands talking by the barn. "Didn't take long for Zimmerman's girl to find a new target," one said with a snicker. "Wonder if this one will leave her at the altar too, or just in his bed." "Shoo, Frank. That ain't right," the other replied, though his tone held more amusement than reproach. "Girl can't help being broken. Some women just don't recover from that kind of humiliation." Clara's hands tightened around the canteen, shame burning her cheeks. She turned to retreat to the house, but Tucker's voice stopped her. "Miss Zimmerman," he called, approaching with a smile that faded when he saw her expression. "Everything all right?" "Fine," she said curtly, thrusting the canteen at him. "Just fine." His eyes flickered toward the barn where the men had quickly busied themselves with work. "People talk too much and think too little," he said quietly. Clara stiffened. "And what have they told you about me, Mr. Vance?" He studied her face for a moment. Nothing I'd put stock in. I prefer to make up my own mind about people. Then you're a rare man in Copper Creek, she replied, turning to leave. Clara, he said, stopping her. It was the first time he'd used her given name. Whatever happened to you? It doesn't define who you are now. She looked back at him, surprised by the gentleness in his voice. You don't know anything about me. I know you bring water to a stranger working in the hot sun, he said. I know you speak softly to frighten horses when you think no one's watching. I know your eyes hold more kindness than most I've encountered in my travels. Clara felt something unfamiliar flutter in her chest, something she'd thought long dead. You shouldn't believe everything you see, Mr. Vance. Tucker, he corrected. And I believe what I observe for myself. That night, Clara sat on the porch swing, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains gold and crimson. The conversation with Tucker played in her mind, along with the dangerous feeling it had stirred hope. The next day brought unexpected visitors to the Lazy Z. Samuel Wilcox and his wife Catherine rode up in a shiny buggy, their arrival sending the ranch into an uncomfortable silence. Clara was in the vegetable garden when her father came to find her, his expression tight with concern. Wilcox is here, he said without preamble. Says he's interested in buying that parcel of land by the creek. Clara's hands stilled among the bean plants. You don't need to protect me, Pa. I can handle seeing him. You shouldn't have to, her father growled. Man's got some nerve showing his face here. But Clara knew the real reason for his visit. Samuel had inherited his father's ranch 6 months ago, and the water access provided by the Zimmerman Creek parcel would increase his property value considerably. Business was business, even when it trampled over broken hearts. She brushed the dirt from her hands and followed her father to the house, where Samuel and Catherine waited on the porch. Samuel looked much as he had 2 years ago, handsome in a conventional way, with carefully combed hair and an expensive suit that seemed out of place on a working ranch. Catherine stood beside him in a fashionable dress, her rounded belly announcing their first child. Clara, Samuel nodded stiffly when he saw her. You're looking well. She acknowledged him with a curt nod, noticing how Catherine's hand tightened on his arm. The younger woman wouldn't meet Clara's eyes. Let's discuss business in my study, her father said, his tone leaving no room for casual conversation. As the men disappeared inside, Clara found herself alone with Catherine on the porch. An awkward silence stretched between them. I'm sorry, Catherine finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. For everything. Clara studied the woman who had once been the banker's pretty daughter and was now the wife Samuel had chosen over her. Are you happy? She asked simply. Catherine looked startled by the question. Yes. Most days. Her hand moved protectively over her stomach. We're expecting a son in December. Clara nodded, surprised to find no bitterness rising within her. Then there's nothing to be sorry for. Before Catherine could respond, the sound of hoofbeats drew their attention. Tucker rode into the yard, leading a saddled horse, the black Mustang, now moving with cautious obedience beside Tucker's own mount. He tipped his hat to the women as he dismounted. Ladies, hope I'm not interrupting. Not at all, Clara said, grateful for the distraction. Tucker Vance, this is Mrs. Catherine Wilcox. Understanding flickered in Tucker's eyes at the name, but his manners remained impeccable. Madam, he greeted Catherine with a respectful nod. You've managed to saddle the Mustang, Clara observed, moving toward the horses. That's impressive. Tucker patted the black horse's neck proudly. He's coming along. Thought we might try a short ride this afternoon, see how he does with someone on his back. Catherine watched their exchange with curious eyes. You're the horsebreaker Miller hired, she said. Samuel mentioned you. Said you have quite the reputation with difficult animals. Just patience and respect, madam, Tucker replied. Most creatures respond well to both. The door opened, and Samuel emerged from the house with James Zimmerman. Samuel's eyes narrowed slightly when he saw Tucker standing near Clara. Vance, he acknowledged coolly. I hear you're working wonders with Zimmerman's stock. Tucker's smile didn't reach his eyes. Just doing what I was hired for, Wilcox. The tension between the men was palpable, though Clara couldn't understand the source. Tucker had only been in Copper Creek for a few days. How could he and Samuel already have formed opinions of each other? After the Wilcoxes departed, Clara found Tucker in the corral, adjusting the Mustang's saddle. You and Samuel Wilcox seem acquainted, she observed. Tucker's hands stilled momentarily. We've crossed paths. Where? He sighed, straightening to face her. Tucson, about 3 years back. He was there on banking business with his father. Clara frowned, calculating the timeline. That would have been while we were engaged. Tucker's expression confirmed her suspicion. He wasn't behaving like an engaged man, Clara. The revelation should have hurt, but Clara felt only a dull confirmation of doubts she'd harbored even before the wedding disaster. Was there a woman? Women, Tucker corrected quietly. I'm sorry. Clara shook her head. Don't be. It's better to know the truth, even late. She met his gaze directly. Is that why you came to Copper Creek? To tell me. Tucker looked genuinely surprised. No. I honestly didn't know you were connected to him until yesterday when one of the hands mentioned it. He ran a hand through his hair. I came for work, plain and simple. Bob Miller's an old friend. Said there was good horse breaking money to be made here. Clara believed him. Tucker Vance didn't strike her as a man who trafficked in revenge or drama. There was something straightforward about him that made duplicity seem impossible. Well, she said after a moment, are we going to ride this Mustang or not? Tucker's smile returned. I grew up on this ranch, Mr. Vance. I've been riding since before I could walk. Tucker handed her the reins. Show me what you can do, Miss Zimmerman. To his evident surprise, Clara mounted the Mustang with practiced ease. The horse tensed beneath her, but she spoke softly to him, one hand resting on his neck. Gradually, the animal relaxed, accepting her weight. That's remarkable, Tucker said. He trusts you. Clara guided the horse around the corral at a walk, feeling the power beneath her. He just needed someone to be patient with him. They spent the afternoon working with the Mustang, Tucker occasionally offering guidance, but mostly watching with obvious admiration as Clara connected with the once wild animal. When they finally unsaddled the tired but calm horse, the sun was setting. You're a natural horsewoman, Tucker said as they walked toward the house. It's in my blood, Clara replied. My mother was the same way. She glanced at him. What about you? How did you learn to gentle horses? Tucker's expression grew reflective. My father raised horses in Texas. He believed in breaking them hard and fast, often with whips and spurs. He shook his head. I saw too many good animals ruined by fear. When I left home at 17, I swore I'd find a better way. How long have you been traveling? Clara asked. 8 years now. Never stayed anywhere longer than a season. He looked toward the distant mountains. Always thought I'd find someplace that felt like home eventually. Something in his tone made Clara wonder if perhaps Copper Creek might become that place. The thought brought both hope and fear. Hope that he might stay, fear that he'd hear enough whispers to change his mind about her. The following Sunday, Clara reluctantly attended church with her father. It was a monthly ordeal she endured mostly for his sake, knowing how the congregants would stare and whisper. This Sunday proved no different, with conversations halting as she walked down the aisle to their usual pew. Reverend Marshall preached about forgiveness and redemption, his eyes occasionally finding Clara in the congregation with what she'd come to recognize as pity. She kept her gaze fixed on her hymnal, counting the minutes until they could leave. As the service concluded, Clara steeled herself for the inevitable gauntlet of false pleasantries and hushed comments. She was surprised when Tucker appeared beside her in the churchyard, looking uncomfortable but handsome in clean clothes and freshly trimmed hair. Miss Zimmerman, he greeted her, tipping his hat. Mr. Zimmerman. Clara's father nodded approvingly. Good to see you in church, Vance. Tucker offered his arm to Clara. May I walk you home? I was hoping to discuss the Mustang's progress. Grateful for the escape, Clara placed her hand on his arm, aware of the stares their departure generated. Once they were beyond earshot of the church crowd, she gave him a questioning look. You didn't have to do that, she said. Do what? Rescue me. Create a diversion to get me away from them. Tucker's expression remained innocent. Can't a man want to discuss business on the Lord's Day? Clara couldn't suppress her smile. You don't strike me as particularly devout, Mr. Vance. I believe in something greater than ourselves, he replied thoughtfully. Just not sure it's confined to church walls or Sunday mornings. He glanced at her. Though I admit, seeing you was additional motivation to attend services today. Heat rose in Clara's cheeks at his candor. No one had spoken to her with such open admiration since before the wedding disaster. It felt dangerous and thrilling at once. You shouldn't say such things, she murmured. Why not? It's the truth. Because people will talk. Tucker's step faltered. Do you care what they say? Clara considered his question seriously. I've spent 2 years caring very much what they say. It's exhausting. Then stop, he said simply. She laughed, the sound surprising her. As if it's that easy. It can be. Tucker guided her toward the creek instead of the main road, taking a scenic route back to the ranch. When I was 20, I got caught up in a situation in Dodge City. Men accused me of cheating at cards. I wasn't, but his friends backed his story. What happened? Clara asked. I got beaten pretty badly, then run out of town with a reputation as a card sharp. Tucker touched a small scar near his eyebrow. For months after, I avoided card games, kept my head down whenever I rode into a new town, worried someone might have heard the rumors. How did you overcome it? Tucker shrugged. Realized I was living as if I'd done something wrong, which made others assume I had. Started holding my head high again, looking men in the eye. Turns out, most folks form their opinions based on what they see for themselves, not what they've heard. Clara considered his words as they walked along the bubbling creek. The difference is, everyone in Copper Creek witnessed my humiliation firsthand. It wasn't a rumor, it was a public spectacle. They saw a moment in time, Tucker corrected gently. One painful day out of thousands. They didn't see you pick yourself up afterward or continue living despite the pain. They don't see your strength, Clara, because they're too busy remembering your suffering. His words touched something deep within her. For 2 years, she'd defined herself by that one terrible day, just as the town had. What might happen if she refused to do so any longer? They reached a bend in the creek where a large cottonwood provided shade. Tucker suggested they rest for a moment, and Clara settled on a smooth rock by the water's edge. Tell me something, Tucker said, skipping a stone across the creek's surface. If you could leave Copper Creek tomorrow, would you? Clara had asked herself the same question countless times. Where would I go? This ranch is my inheritance, my responsibility. My father isn't getting any younger. That's not what I asked. She sighed, trailing her fingers in the cool water. Yes, I'd leave. Start somewhere fresh, where no one knows my name or my story. Tucker nodded, as if her answer confirmed something for him. I have a proposition for you, Clara Zimmerman. Her heart skipped nervously. What kind of proposition? A business one, he clarified with a small smile. For now. The following week brought changes to the Lazy Z Ranch. Tucker, having successfully broken the Black Mustang, had proposed a new venture to James Zimmerman, a horse training business. With Tucker's expertise and the Zimmermans' land and reputation, they could breed and train quality horses for ranchers throughout the territory. To Clara's surprise, her father had embraced the idea enthusiastically. Tucker's offer included a partnership arrangement, with him investing his own savings alongside his labor. The first step was constructing a proper training corral and expanding the stables, work that began immediately with help from the ranch hands. Clara found herself working alongside Tucker daily, planning the new venture and helping with the construction. His presence brought a renewed energy to the ranch and to her. She caught herself smiling more, laughing at his dry humor, and looking forward to each dawn with an anticipation she'd forgotten was possible. Of course, the town noticed. Clara's weekly trips for supplies now generated fresh whispers. She's setting herself up for another heartbreak, Mrs. Holbrook commented loudly as Clara selected fabric at the general store. That drifter will move on once he's had his fun. She never did learn her lesson, agreed another woman. Some people are just broken beyond repair. Clara's hands trembled as she measured the calico, the familiar shame threatening to overwhelm her. But then she remembered Tucker's words by the creek. They saw a moment in time, one painful day out of thousands. She set down the fabric, turned, and faced the gossiping women directly. Ladies, she said clearly, if you have something to say about me, I'd appreciate you saying it to my face rather than behind my back. The women froze, stunned by her confrontation. Clara, dear, Mrs. Holbrook recovered first. We're just concerned for your welfare. After what happened with Samuel was 2 years ago, Clara interrupted. And while I appreciate your concern, my welfare is my own responsibility. She completed her purchases with a steady hand and departed the store with her head high. Outside, she nearly collided with Tucker, who was loading supplies into a wagon. "Everything all right?" he asked, noting her flushed cheeks. "Perfect," she replied, surprised to find she meant it. The confrontation had left her feeling lighter rather than humiliated. Tucker's slow smile warmed her from within. "I was thinking of riding out to see that parcel of land by the North Ridge this afternoon. Your father mentioned it might be suitable for a breeding pasture. Care to join me?" The afternoon ride became one of many over the following weeks. As summer gave way to early autumn, Clara and Tucker fell into an easy rhythm of work and conversation. She told him about her mother's death from pneumonia, about her dreams of someday traveling to San Francisco, about the books she loved, and the music she missed since the town's only piano player had moved away. Tucker shared stories of his travels, the characters he'd met on cattle drives and in frontier towns, his brief stint as a deputy in a New Mexico mining settlement. He spoke of his difficult father and gentle mother, his 3 sisters back in Texas whom he hadn't seen in years. They rebuilt fences, planned pasture rotations, broke horses, and moved cattle working side by side as equals. In those hours, Clara felt the pieces of herself that had shattered 2 years ago slowly knitting back together, forming something new and possibly stronger than before. It was during a cattle roundup in late September that everything changed. A sudden thunderstorm spooked the herd, sending the animals into a panic. Clara, riding flank, found herself in the path of the stampede when her horse stepped in a prairie dog hole and went down hard. She hit the ground, rolling to avoid being trampled by her own mount, but found herself directly in the path of the oncoming cattle. In an instant that stretched like eternity, Clara saw her death approaching in a wall of horns and hoofs. Then Tucker was there, his horse cutting between her and the stampede, his hand reaching down to grasp hers. With a strength born of desperation, he pulled her up behind him in one fluid motion, spurring his horse away from the danger. They rode hard until they reached the safety of a rocky outcropping, where Tucker finally reined in. Clara slid from the horse on shaking legs, adrenaline making her dizzy. Without a word, Tucker dismounted and pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly against his chest. "I thought I'd lost you," he whispered against her hair, his voice rough with emotion. Clara clung to him, feeling the thunder of his heart matching her own. When she tilted her face up to thank him, his lips found hers instead. The kiss was desperate at first, then gentled into something tender and questioning. Clara answered with her own longing, her arms tightening around his neck. When they finally broke apart, rain pouring down around them, Tucker rested his forehead against hers. "I've wanted to do that since the first day I saw you in town," he admitted. Clara traced the line of his jaw with trembling fingers. "Why didn't you?" "Because you weren't ready." He brushed wet strands of hair from her face. "And because I needed you to see yourself as I see you, strong, resilient, unbroken before you could believe I truly want you." They sought shelter in a lined shack until the storm passed, talking for hours about their growing feelings and the future they might build together. By the time they returned to the ranch, where a search party was preparing to ride out, Clara knew with certainty that her heart had fully awakened from its long slumber. The town's reaction to their courtship was predictably mixed. Some, like Mr. Peterson and Doc Harrison, seemed genuinely pleased to see Clara happy again. Others doubled down on their predictions of disaster. "He'll leave her just like Samuel did," Clara overheard Mrs. Geller telling a customer at the general store. "Men like that don't settle down, especially not with broken women." The words still stung, but Clara found they no longer had the power to define her. With each passing day, as Tucker proved his commitment through actions rather than just words, her confidence grew. He wasn't Samuel. And she wasn't the same woman who had stood weeping at an empty altar. On a crisp October evening, as they sat on the porch after supper, Tucker took her hand. "I have something to show you," he said, leading her to the barn. Inside, he lit a lantern and guided her to a stall where the black Mustang stood. The horse nickered softly when he saw Clara, reaching his head over the gate. "He's taken to you completely," Tucker observed. "Better than to anyone else." Clara stroked the Mustang's velvety nose. "We understand each other." Tucker reached into his pocket and pulled out a small leather pouch. "I had something made for you in town." He tipped the contents into his palm, a delicate silver bracelet with a single charm, a tiny galloping horse. "It's beautiful," Clara breathed as he fastened it around her wrist. I named him, Tucker said, nodding toward the Mustang. Phoenix. Clara raised an eyebrow. Because he rose from the ashes of his wild past. Tucker shook his head, his eyes holding hers steadily. Because he reminded me of you. Something beautiful emerging from pain, stronger for having endured the fire. He took both her hands in his. I love you, Clara Zimmerman. I know it hasn't been long in the counting of months, but I've known since that day by the creek that you're the woman I want to build a life with. Clara's heart swelled with joy and certainty. I love you too, she whispered. Then marry me, he said simply. Not because you need saving or protection, but because together, we're better than we are apart. Clara's smile was radiant as she gave him her answer. This time, there would be no elaborate church wedding, no spectacle for the town to witness. They would marry quietly at the ranch, surrounded only by those who truly wished them well. As news of their engagement spread through Copper Creek, Clara noticed a subtle shift in how some townspeople regarded her. Mrs. Holbrook stopped whispering when Clara entered the general store. Mr. Geller offered congratulations that seemed genuinely warm. Even Reverend Marshall spoke to her without that pitying tone she'd come to detest. It was on a November morning, as Clara and Tucker discussed spring breeding plans with her father, that a familiar buggy drove up to the ranch house. Samuel Wilcox stepped down, looking somewhat uncomfortable as he approached. Zimmerman, he nodded to Clara's father. Vance. Clara. He cleared his throat. I wanted to extend my congratulations on your engagement. Catherine insisted I come in person. That's mighty civil of you, Wilcox. Tucker replied evenly. Samuel shifted his weight. Also wanted to increase my offer on that creek parcel. My son was born last week. Got me thinking about the future, expanding the ranch for him. As the men discussed business, Clara observed her former fiancé with detached curiosity. She felt nothing for him now, no anger, no regret, not even indifference. He was simply a person from her past, no more significant than any other acquaintance. After Samuel departed, Tucker found Clara in the garden, harvesting the last of the autumn vegetables before the first frost. You all right? He asked, kneeling beside her. Clara looked up at the man who had taught her to trust again, not through grand gestures or promises, but through daily acts of respect and partnership. I'm more than all right, she assured him. I'm exactly where I'm meant to be. Tucker took her soil-stained hand and pressed a kiss to her palm. I overheard something in town yesterday. Thought you should know. Clara tensed slightly. What now? Mrs. Holbrook was talking to some ladies outside the church. She said, and I quote, Clara Zimmerman has certainly blossomed this year. Goes to show what the right man can do for a woman's spirits. Clara couldn't help laughing. And what did you say to that? Tucker's eyes crinkled at the corners. I said, Madam, with all due respect, Clara healed herself. I just had the good sense to recognize her strength when others only saw her scars. On their wedding day in early December, Clara wore a simple blue dress that matched the winter sky. The ceremony took place in the Lazy Z's main house, with only her father, Tucker's friend Bob Miller, and a handful of trusted ranch hands in attendance. Reverend Marshall pronounced them husband and wife as the afternoon sun streamed through the windows. Later, as they shared their first dance on the cleared floor of the barn, decorated with lanterns and winter greenery, Tucker pulled Clara close. Happy? He murmured against her temple. Completely, she replied, nestling into his embrace. Though I do have one request. Anything. I'd like to ride into town tomorrow, she said. Together, as husband and wife. The next day, Clara and Tucker Vance rode side by side down Copper Creek's main street. She wore her best riding habit and held her head high, her husband's steady presence beside her a testament not to her brokenness, but to her resilience. Outside the general store, the usual cluster of gossips fell silent as the couple approached. Clara nodded politely to Mrs. Holbrook and the others before dismounting. As Tucker tied their horses, she heard a familiar whisper. There she goes, wasn't she the one who was jilted? Poor broken thing. Before the hurt could register, Tucker's hand settled at the small of her back, his voice carrying just enough for the gossips to hear. There's nothing broken about my wife, he said clearly. She's the strongest person I know, and I'm the fortunate man who gets to build a life with her. As they entered the store together, Clara caught their reflection in the window glass, two people standing tall, faces forward, ready to write their own story beyond the whispers of the past. Not broken, but beautifully, imperfectly whole.